In the frostbitten stillness of a Colorado forest, where pine trees whisper ancient secrets and the mist clings to the earth like memory, two shadows lay beside an old dirt road, one breathing weakly, the other refusing to leave. No leash, no owner, just raw devotion and a silent plea for help. And on that quiet morning, a man grieving a love he'd lost stumbled upon a love he never expected. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe animals deserve love, not abandonment, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear may just stay with you forever. Frost Hollow stretched beneath a leaden Colorado sky, where dawn arrived not in golden light, but in soft grays and long, heavy silences. It was the kind of morning that clung to the bones cold, quiet, and still. The kind of silence only broken by the wind scraping across pine needles or the crunch of frost beneath worn-out tires. Lucas Reed hadn't planned to drive this far, this early, or at all, but grief was like a map with no compass. It sent you wandering, hoping to lose something that kept finding you. Lucas was 35 and carried the look of someone who had once been filled with life and plans, but now moved like a man half submerged in water. His face was angular and sun-worn, framed by a short beard that grew more out of neglect than style. Broad-shouldered, tall, with calloused hands from years as a carpenter, Lucas now wore his sorrow like a second skin. It had been 8 months since the crash that took Mariah, his fiancée, his anchor, and he hadn't set foot in their cabin at Silverpine Lake since. The place they built together had become too quiet to bear. But that morning, something pulled at him. A voice, a dream. He couldn't name it. He just got in his truck and drove north through the mountain passes, steering toward the cabin like a ghost retracing its own footprints. The mist thickened as he passed the old forestry road, winding deeper into the backcountry. That's when he saw them. Two figures at the edge of the tree line, just off the gravel shoulder. At first, they looked like rocks or a pile of debris, half covered in frost. Lucas slowed the truck, peering through the windshield. As his headlights washed over the scene, the shapes took form. Two dogs. One lay completely still, a German shepherd by its markings black saddle, tan limbs, bushy tail matted with dirt and blood. Its hind legs stuck out at a wrong angle, and its side barely rose and fell. The other stood beside it, tense, unmoving, almost statuesque in the way it shielded the injured one. It didn't bark, didn't run. It just watched. Lucas pulled over and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. He opened his door slowly, stepping onto the icy gravel with the caution of someone trying not to break something already broken. The standing dog didn't move, but let out a low growl, deep and restrained, not a threat, more a warning. He crouched a few yards away, raising both hands in calm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he murmured, voice gravelly from sleep and silence. The wind bit at his face, but he didn't flinch. He looked at the injured dog breathing, but unconscious, and the one still on its feet, who refused to abandon it. Frost clung to both of their coats and neither wore a collar. "You're out here alone?" Lucas asked gently, knowing full well he wouldn't get an answer. The dog guarding its companion, its sibling, Lucas assumed, was a full-grown male, maybe 4 years old. Muscular under the dirt and grime, its ears flicked forward at every sound, every breath. Its eyes, yellow-brown and unblinking, stayed locked on Lucas's face. Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled granola bar. He tore it open, broke off a piece, and tossed it lightly onto the ground between them. The dog sniffed the air, but didn't budge. Instead, it stepped closer to the injured dog and nudged it lightly with its nose. Lucas swallowed the lump rising in his throat. 8 months ago, Mariah had shown him a picture on her laptop. A German shepherd at a rescue shelter, scarred but proud. "That's the one," she had said, laughing. "A dog with too many stories and not enough chances, just like us." They had promised to adopt after the wedding. That promise now sat like a stone in Lucas's chest. "Of course it had to be shepherds," he muttered. "Of course!" Moving slow, he slid off his jacket and knelt beside the injured dog. It didn't stir. Its fur was cold, and its breathing shallow, but it was still breathing. Lucas gently draped his jacket over its body, shielding it from the wind. The standing dog tensed, but didn't resist. "I don't know if this is the right thing," Lucas said quietly. "But I think you need me. And maybe I need you too." He turned and walked back to the truck, leaving the door open. Then he returned with the floor mat from the passenger side. He knelt again, carefully shifting the injured dog onto the makeshift stretcher. It took time. He didn't want to jolt the leg or damage anything further. The standing dog hovered the whole time, one step away, close enough to intervene, but not enough to interfere. When Lucas gently placed the wounded animal on the back seat, the other dog didn't hesitate. It jumped in after, curled tightly beside its companion, its body touching from shoulder to paw. Lucas sat in the driver's seat and exhaled deeply. The heater began to hum, and the windshield slowly cleared. In the mirror, he saw them curled together, two shadows wrapped in frost, holding on to each other like memory. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow, dusting the windshield with flakes like quiet confessions. He turned the key. He didn't know where exactly he was going, but he knew where to start. The town of Maple Hollow sat quietly at the edge of the mountains, its streets slick with snowmelt and its houses puffing gentle trails of smoke into the cold morning air. Lucas pulled into the gravel lot of the Maple Hollow Veterinary Clinic just after sunrise. The building was a cozy A-frame tucked between a shuttered antique shop and an old church with icicles hanging from the eaves. Warm light spilled from its frosted windows, a small sanctuary against the cold. In the back seat of Lucas's truck, the two dogs were still curled together. The injured one had barely moved, his breathing shallow but present. The other, the guardian, had not taken his eyes off Lucas since the truck started. That steady, silent gaze had followed every bump and curve in the road, like a soldier refusing to leave his post. Lucas reached over and gently opened the door. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "We're here." As he reached to lift the injured dog, the healthy one let out a low, warning growl. Lucas froze. "I'm just trying to help," he said softly. The growl didn't deepen, but the dog stood, stiff and watchful. Slowly, Lucas scooped up the injured dog, still cold but alive, and cradled him like a child, the dog's head lolling slightly onto his chest. The other followed him out of the truck and through the front door without hesitation. A bell above the door chimed softly as Lucas stepped inside, and the warmth of the clinic wrapped around them like a blanket. The smell of antiseptic and pine cleaner hung in the air. From behind the counter emerged a woman in her early 40s, tall and strong-boned, with auburn hair tied back into a hasty bun and practical glasses perched on her nose. Her name badge read Dr. Joanna Miles. She had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor and the kind of face that looked like it rarely blinked in an emergency. Years of working with both wild and domestic animals had etched a quiet assurance into the way she moved. "You Lucas?" she asked, already reaching for a pair of gloves. He nodded. "Called about 2 dogs. Found them off the forestry road. One's hurt bad." "Bring him back here," she said, holding the door open into the exam area. The back room was clean and bright, with stainless steel counters and heat lamps hanging from ceiling tracks. Lucas laid the injured dog gently on a padded table. Dr. Miles immediately began checking his vitals temperature, pulse, eyes. "Male, about 4 years old," she muttered, her hands moving expertly. "Rear legs fractured, hypothermia setting in. Probably hasn't eaten in days." The healthy dog stood beside the table, stiff and tense. Joanna paused to look at him. "And this one?" "Found them together," Lucas said. "This guy wouldn't let me touch the injured one at first. But then he followed me into the truck. Didn't hesitate, like he was deciding to trust." Joanna knelt down and offered her hand. The standing dog sniffed her palm cautiously, then pressed his muzzle into it, accepting her. "I've seen bonded dogs before," Joanna said, her voice gentler now. "But this is something deeper. He's not just guarding, he's grieving." Lucas didn't reply. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes flicking between the 2 dogs. "They need names," he said finally. Joanna looked at him with raised brows. He gestured toward the one on the table. "This one? He's tough. Took a hit but held on, still warm under all that frost. Call him Whiskey." Joanna smiled faintly. "And the other?" Lucas turned to the healthy one. "He never left his side. Quiet. Watches everything. Always a step behind, but never far. Feels like a shadow." The dog looked up at the sound of the word. "That's it," Lucas said. "Shadow." Just then, the door swung open with the clatter of boots on tile. A boy entered, carrying a backpack half unzipped and a drawing pad under his arm. He was 10 years old, with tousled brown hair and oversized snow boots. His jacket sleeves hung too long for his arms, and there was a small tear near the hem of his jeans. "Cody," Joanna said without looking up, "you're late." "Sorry," the boy mumbled. "The bus missed again. I walked." She sighed but didn't scold him. "You know the rules. Homework first, then animals." Lucas turned slightly, watching as the boy noticed the dogs. Cody's eyes widened, and the drawing pad nearly slipped from his arms. "Are those German shepherds?" he asked, stepping closer with hesitant wonder. "Found them this morning," Lucas said. "That's Whiskey. He's hurt. The other is Shadow." Cody didn't hesitate. He walked directly to Shadow, who sat calmly and let the boy stroke his fur. Shadow leaned into the touch almost immediately, and Cody's face lit up with something Lucas hadn't seen in his own reflection for months. Trust. Joanna, watching from the corner of her eye, gave Lucas a small nod. "You've got something special here," she said. "Not just dogs, a bond." Cody sat cross-legged beside Shadow on the tile. "He's like a soldier," the boy said, "like he's standing guard." Lucas crouched next to him. "You like dogs?" Cody nodded without looking up. "They don't lie to you. They don't laugh at your clothes or your drawings." Lucas caught the implication. There was more behind those words than Cody was willing to say. Joanna glanced toward them. "Cody's been through a lot. Lost his parents in a fire 2 years ago. Lives with me now. School's been tough." Lucas nodded silently. He understood that kind of silence, the kind that didn't want to explain anymore. Shadow nuzzled Cody gently. The boy didn't flinch. "He knows," Cody whispered. "He gets it." Joanna stood. "I'm going to get x-rays started for Whiskey. You two can stay with Shadow if you'd like." Lucas leaned back against the wall, watching boy and dog, the broken and the bruised, slowly finding something whole in each other. He didn't know what he was supposed to do next, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like he was alone. Snow still clung to the gutters and sidewalk edges outside the Maple Hollow Veterinary Clinic, as Lucas pushed open the door for the 3rd day in a row. The old bell above it gave its usual soft chime, but this time, it felt like a familiar soundless sterile, more welcoming. The morning sun filtered through gray clouds, casting thin gold stripes on the floor inside. He made his way past the front counter, nodding at the receptionist, a woman in her 60s named Martha Vance, who always wore her graying hair in a tidy braid, and had the steady patience of someone who'd worked reception for both emergency rooms and veterinary clinics in her lifetime. She simply gave Lucas her usual warm, wordless nod and motioned him toward the back. In the recovery ward, it was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional sound of claws shifting on tile. Whiskey lay curled on a blanket under a heat lamp, his rear leg wrapped in thick gauze, splinted and secured. His breathing was calm now, and he blinked slowly as Lucas entered, acknowledging him with a slight wag of his tail. In the corner of the room, Shadow sat like a sentinel, unmoving. He had barely left Whiskey's side since the surgery. Joanna had allowed him to stay in the recovery room after realizing the injured dog's heart rate spiked every time Shadow wasn't nearby. The two were more than just bonded. They seemed emotionally fused. Whiskey had gone under the previous morning. The procedure had lasted over an hour. Joanna had come out afterward, pulling off her gloves with exhausted hands, and told Lucas, "It was clean. We pinned the bone. If infection doesn't set in, he'll walk again." And then, more quietly, she had added, "He fought the anesthesia. I've never seen a dog so resistant to going under, like he was afraid of leaving the other behind." Lucas had stayed long into the evening that day, sitting on the cold bench in the hallway while Shadow paced and whimpered every time the door swung open. He hadn't realized until he'd gotten home, that night home now, meaning a room at the Pine Lantern Motel, that his hands smelled like iodine and wet fur. Now, on this morning, Lucas walked up to Whiskey's kennel, crouched down and whispered, "Hey, tough guy." Whiskey didn't try to sit up, but he licked Lucas's fingers when they slid through the gate. Shadow padded over, sniffed Lucas's coat like checking for any threat, then lay down beside Whiskey again, their bodies pressed together as close as the space would allow. Dr. Joanna entered from the adjacent room, her long coat covered in faint smudges from a German short-haired pointer she had just treated. "His temp's stable," she said. "No signs of infection. Appetite's still low, but that's not unusual post-op. Lucas nodded. You think he'll get full use of the leg back? Too early to say, but dogs are adaptable. Even if he limps, he'll run again. She paused. You're here early. Yeah. Figured I'd bring breakfast. He held up a brown paper bag from Rosie's cafe across the street. One for me, one for Martha, one if you're hungry. Joanna smiled, a rare softening of her usual clinical expression. Only if you stop bringing food every morning. I'm not trying to adopt your habits. Lucas grinned faintly and sat down on the bench near the window. Snow continued to fall beyond the glass, but it was light now, almost decorative. Later that day, while Whiskey rested and Shadow slept with one paw across his brother's chest, Lucas took a battered notebook from the inside pocket of his flannel jacket. It was old, its leather cover cracked at the spine. Inside were a few pages of faded handwriting, Mariah's notes from their trip to Montana, grocery lists in cursive, her favorite soup recipe. The rest of the pages were blank. He stared at the paper for a long time before writing anything. Mariah had always kept a journal filled with everything, dreams, quotes, sketches of furniture she wanted to build. She used to beg Lucas to do the same, to write things down before they disappear. He'd always waved it off. My memory's good, he'd say. But grief had shown him how fast memories could vanish when left unguarded. He finally wrote, Day 1. I thought I was rescuing them, but maybe they are the ones saving me. The one who fights in silence. The one who stays no matter what. Maybe I've needed that more than I knew. He didn't sign it, just closed the journal and held it for a while. Then he placed it back into his coat. Later that afternoon, Cody arrived after school, his oversized backpack swinging behind him. Joanna had allowed him a half hour after homework to visit the dogs. He approached quietly, respectful as always, and knelt beside Shadow, who now greeted him with a short tail thump. How's he doing today? Cody asked. Better, Lucas said. Doc says he's healing. Cody sat cross-legged, petting Shadow behind the ears. He looks tired, but happy. He is. He's got his brother. That's more than most. Cody nodded solemnly, and after a long pause, he looked up. You think they knew someone would find them? Lucas didn't answer right away. He thought of the way the healthy dog had stared him down that first morning, not with fear, but with something more like insistence. I think maybe they were waiting for someone who wouldn't leave, Lucas said. Cody smiled and scratched Shadow's neck. Then I'm glad it was you. Lucas didn't say it, but the thought echoed in his chest like a bell. So am I. The sun had returned to Maple Hollow, pushing through the clouds with a golden warmth that made the snow begin to melt along the sidewalks and gutters. It was the kind of day that whispered change, the kind that melted not just ice, but something deeper, something stuck inside the heart. At the clinic, the mood had subtly shifted too. Whiskey's bandages were lighter now, his steps still uneven but no longer tremulous. Shadow no longer stood guard every second. He had started to stretch his legs outside, his gait proud, tail high, as if reclaiming his place in the world. That afternoon, as Lucas leaned against the window of the recovery room, watching the two dogs rest side by side, Dr. Joanna Miles entered holding a tablet and a mug of tea. She wore her usual green scrubs, her auburn hair tucked into a no-nonsense ponytail, and the crow's feet at her eyes seemed more pronounced today, like she hadn't slept enough but was too used to it to complain. They're recovering faster than I expected, she said, sipping her tea. Whiskey's responding well to therapy, and Shadow is clearly thriving now that he's not constantly on high alert. Lucas gave a nod, eyes still on the dogs. So what now? You planning to release them somewhere? Joanna sat on the edge of the bench, tablet resting on her knee. That's the thing, she said. I've consulted a few wildlife behaviorists and local shelter partners. Normally, with strays, you'd aim to rewild if possible. But these two, they're past that. Their dependency on humans, especially on you, is too strong. They wouldn't survive long in the wild, and separating them is out of the question. Lucas exhaled slowly. I don't want to separate them either. She looked at him thoughtfully. Then the question becomes, where do they belong? Lucas didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a key long and tarnished with a deep nick on one side, and turned it over in his palm. I have a cabin, he said quietly. At Silver Pine Lake. I haven't been back since... Well, it's been a while. It's empty, quiet, Just trees, a dock, and a wood-burning stove. We built it to start a life. Maybe it can still be used for that. Just a different kind of life. Joanna looked at him, her expression unreadable at first. Then her voice softened. You think you're ready to go back? He didn't know if it was readiness or necessity, but he nodded. I think maybe they need it. And maybe I do too. The drive to Silver Pine took just under an hour, winding through mountain passes and pine-covered hillsides. Shadow sat alert in the back seat, gazing out the window as if reading the trees. Whiskey lay beside him, head resting on a rolled-up blanket. Lucas had packed extra supplies, bed cushions, and a bag of their favorite treats from the clinic pantry. As the truck crested the final bend, the lake appeared still partially frozen, glinting under the pale afternoon sun. The cabin sat at the water's edge, half draped in shadow, half glowing in light. Its dark cedar siding had weathered the past winter, but moss clung stubbornly to the roof's edge. The chimney stood like a sentinel, and the wide porch still held 2 wooden chairs that had gone unused for far too long. Lucas parked, stepped out, and took a deep breath of the crisp air. It smelled of pine needles and ash familiar, heavy, real. He opened the back and helped Whiskey down slowly. Shadow followed instantly, sniffing the air, tail wagging faintly. The moment they reached the porch, Shadow bounded up the steps like he'd lived there forever. Whiskey limped behind, determined, head held high. Inside, the cabin was exactly as Lucas had left it, dusty but untouched. A ceramic mug still sat on the mantel. A flannel shirt hung on a hook by the door. Mariah's favorite sweater was draped over the back of the rocking chair, soft and faded blue. He didn't move it. That night, Lucas built a fire and lay on the floor beside the dogs, wrapped in a blanket with the sound of the wood crackling beside them. Shadow curled at his feet, Whiskey snuggled by his side. The cabin didn't feel so empty anymore. By the weekend, the place began to feel like a home again. Lucas cleared out the shed, built a ramp for Whiskey, and set up feeding stations inside and out. On Saturday morning, a yellow school bus stopped at the end of the gravel path, and Cody stepped out, carrying a backpack nearly as big as he was, and a homemade dog whistle hanging from a shoelace around his neck. Lucas greeted him with a wave. "You sure your aunt was okay with this?" "She said I needed the fresh air," Cody replied, grinning. "And she knows I'm safer with these two than I am anywhere else." Cody spent the weekend learning to give commands basic sit, stay, heel. But Shadow responded to him like they shared a secret language. Lucas watched as the boy, once so quiet and withdrawn, began to stand a little straighter, speak a little louder, and even crack a few jokes while brushing Whiskey's fur. That night, after roasting marshmallows over a fire pit Lucas hadn't touched since the summer before the accident, Cody shared something he hadn't said before. "There's a kid at school," he said, voice low. "His name's Evan. He gets picked on worse than I do. But this week, when they started teasing him again, I told them to back off." Lucas turned to him. "What made you do that?" Cody looked toward Shadow, who was now dozing near the fire. "I don't know. I felt like if he can protect his brother, maybe I can protect someone too." Lucas didn't reply, but he reached over and ruffled Cody's hair, something he hadn't done with any child before, and felt, deep in his chest, a piece of him settling back into place. The wind off Silver Pine Lake was especially sharp that night, a biting cold that rattled the shutters of the cabin and whistled through the chimney like a ghost searching for a door it once knew. Inside, the fire had burned low to embers, casting faint orange glows that flickered across the worn wooden floor. Lucas lay on the couch, wrapped in a quilt Mariah's grandmother had sewn years ago, its stitching frayed at the corners. Shadow lay at the foot of the couch, unmoving, while Whiskey slept curled in a ball near the hearth, his limp hind leg gently twitching in dreams. Sleep came slow and restless for Lucas. The dream came again, this time more vivid than before, tires skidding, her scream, then silence. The kind of silence that stretched across time. In the dream, he stood in the middle of a road that looped into darkness. He kept turning in circles, calling her name, but all that came back was wind, then the headlights, and the moment just before the crash. Replaying like a cruel reel. Lucas shot up, breath caught in his throat. His shirt was damp with sweat, heart pounding as if he'd sprinted miles. The room was silent except for the faint creak of logs shifting in the fireplace. And then he saw them. Shadow, ever watchful, sat near his head, eyes steady, ears slightly raised. Whiskey had lifted his own head, now gently resting it across Lucas's foot like a warm, grounding weight. Lucas swallowed the rising lump in his throat and let out a shaky breath. The dogs didn't move, didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough. He hadn't felt this protected in months, since before the accident. Back when Mariah would lie next to him, fingers absent-mindedly tracing lines across his chest, whispering plans about gardens and dogs and summers without end. The kind of small promises that made the world feel unshakable until it wasn't. Lucas sat forward, rubbing his face with his hands, then looked toward the far corner of the cabin. The wardrobe, her wardrobe, untouched. He stood slowly, careful not to disturb the dogs, and walked across the creaky floor. The wardrobe groaned open, revealing the stillness inside. Neatly folded sweaters, 2 scarves, and a worn pair of boots with a pine needle still caught in the lace. Then, on the top shelf, a small wooden box. He took it down gently, brushing off the thin layer of dust. Inside was the leather collar, simple chestnut brown, with a polished silver tag. It was engraved with one word, Buddy. Mariah had bought it just 3 weeks before the accident. She'd held it up in the living room, smiling from ear to ear, saying, "We don't even have a dog yet, but now we have the name." They had planned to adopt one after the wedding. She had wanted a shepherd. Strong, loyal, with eyes that see through you. Lucas sat back down on the couch, collar in hand, his fingers tracing the smooth leather. Shadow lifted his head slightly as if sensing the shift, but Lucas turned to Whiskey, still half asleep, his good ear twitching. "You were meant for this," Lucas whispered, sliding down to his knees. "Maybe not the name, but the promise." He reached out and slowly clasped the collar around Whiskey's neck. The dog didn't stir, only leaned gently into the touch as if accepting something deeper than just a name. Shadow moved beside them, placing his head on Lucas's thigh. There was no thunderclap of closure, no miraculous burst of light. Just quiet, gentle, present silence, the kind that replaced the howling one. Lucas sat like that for a long time, one hand resting on Shadow's back, the other on Whiskey's collar, feeling the warmth return to a part of himself he thought had frozen for good. The forest of Frost Hollow wore silence like a second skin. Midnight wrapped around the cabin like a wool blanket, thick and heavy, pierced only by the whisper of pine needles shifting in the wind. Inside, the fire had died down to glowing embers, casting soft shadows across the living room floor. Whiskey lay curled near the hearth, his injured leg tucked under him. Shadow slept by the door, ever the sentinel, ears twitching even in slumber. Lucas had gone to bed early, tired from a day of chopping firewood and fixing the creaky hinges on the back door. The house felt more like home these days. Still, something in the air tonight felt off, like a wrong note in a lullaby. It happened in seconds. A faint creak, the muffled shift of metal against wood. Shadow's eyes snapped open, head lifting fast. He didn't bark. He growled, low and rumbling, like a storm rolling in. Whiskey stirred, his body tense. Another sound, the soft but unmistakable click of a door being pushed open. Lucas shot upright in bed, heart thudding. Then came a sharp bark and the sound of claws skidding on hardwood. He reached for the flashlight on his nightstand, but Shadow was already gone, his growls turning into full-throated warning barks. Whiskey followed, limping but determined. Downstairs, the kitchen light was off, but movement cut through the shadows. A man in a dark hoodie, face hidden beneath a cap, was rifling through drawers. He moved like someone who had done this many times, fast, quiet, efficient. His name was Lester Grant, known on the street as Coyote, a drifter, smart, dangerous, suspected in a string of break-ins across Colorado, but never caught in the act. Until tonight. As Shadow lunged, barking ferociously, Coyote turned sharply and pulled a small knife from his belt. But he wasn't ready for Whiskey, who barreled into him with surprising force, knocking him to the ground. The knife clattered across the floor. Shadow snapped his teeth inches from the man's throat, blocking his escape. From across the clearing, porch lights flicked on. One belonged to Hank Davis, Lucas's nearest neighbor, an ex-cop in his early 60s, stocky and broad-shouldered, with a stiff right leg from an old knee injury. Despite retirement, he slept lightly and still kept his service pistol in a locked drawer by the front door. When he heard the commotion, he didn't hesitate. Throwing on a coat and boots, he made his way through the snow with the same urgency he'd carried as a patrolman for decades. Inside, Lucas finally reached the top of the stairs and froze at the scene, the kitchen in disarray. Shadow crouched in a guard stance, Whiskey holding firm despite his injury, and a strange man on the floor between them, breathing heavily, eyes wild with panic. "Don't move!" Hank's voice boomed as he burst in through the front door, gun raised. Coyote glanced toward the back door, his escape, but Shadow was already there, teeth bared. Whiskey blocked the side, trapped. He dropped his hands, shaking, and mumbled, Okay, I'm done." Hank approached with practiced caution, kicking the knife away and slapping on a pair of cuffs he still carried. "Lester Grant," he muttered, "you picked the wrong house tonight." Lucas came down slowly, barefoot and stunned. The adrenaline was still racing through his blood. "Are you okay?" Hank asked him. Lucas nodded. "Thanks to them." The dogs didn't break their positions until Hank hauled Coyote out of the house. Even then, they followed him to the door, eyes narrowed, tails stiff with vigilance. They didn't bark. They didn't gloat. They simply watched, as if to say, "Not on our watch." Later, with Coyote secured in the back of Hank's truck and calls made to the sheriff's department, the quiet returned. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the rhythmic crunch of Hank's boots in the snow. "You ever think," Hank said as he turned to Lucas, "maybe they didn't just protect you. Maybe they protected something else?" Lucas understood. This cabin had been a dream he once built with someone he loved, Mariah, the woman who never got to live here. And now, two dogs with broken pasts had defended that dream when he himself was too stunned to act. The next morning dawned soft and bright, sunlight glinting off a fresh layer of snow. Lucas stood on the porch with a mug of coffee when a familiar figure appeared at the tree-lined Cody. His red winter coat puffed out like a balloon, and in his hands was something rolled up like a scroll. "Uncle Lucas!" Cody shouted as he ran up. "Aunt Joe told me what happened. Are you okay?" "I am now," Lucas said, kneeling to greet the boy. Cody unrolled the scroll to reveal a hand-drawn badge colored in crayon. K9 Hero of Frost Hollow. There were two dogs drawn with capes, one with a bandage on its leg, the other with a lightning bolt on its chest. "This is for Shadow and Whiskey," Cody said seriously. "They're not just dogs, they're protectors." Lucas smiled as the boy walked over to pin the badge on Shadow's collar. Shadow accepted the gesture like a knight receiving a medal. Whiskey, lying nearby, received a gentle hug and a whispered, "Thanks for saving my uncle." Lucas didn't speak much the rest of that morning, but in his chest, something fragile and long lost pulsed back to life. Trust, belonging, maybe even purpose. These dogs hadn't just saved his life, they were giving it back. The morning sun broke through the thin clouds like a quiet promise. Frost Hollow, blanketed in snow just days before, now glistened under early spring light. Icicles dripped rhythmically from the edge of Lucas's roof, and the scent of thawing earth crept into the air. The lake, still half frozen, shimmered in shades of slate blue and pearl gray. It was a kind of rebirth, the kind Lucas hadn't believed in for a long time. Whiskey trotted across the yard with a slow but steady gait, the limp from his old injury now barely noticeable. His golden-brown coat had regained its shine, and his eyes sparkled with mischief again. He paused to bark twice, as if announcing his return to the world. Shadow followed behind, more restrained as always, but with a certain elegance in every step, tail held high like a banner. Lucas had been up since dawn, shoveling snow and hammering the final planks into place. What was once a patchy, forgotten backyard was now transformed into a carefully fenced-in haven. A dog play yard, complete with a hand-built agility tunnel, tire jump, and even a shallow water pit for summer months. The final touch was a carved wooden sign that read, "Whiskey and Shadow's Run," which Lucas had burned into the wood himself. Lucas wiped sweat from his brow and leaned on the fence, watching the two dogs sniff around their new playground. His beard had grown a little longer, speckled with gray, and the lines around his eyes had softened. He was no longer the man who had driven through Frost Hollow, lost in grief. He was beginning to become someone else, someone whole. That transformation, in part, had something to do with Lindsay. Joanna had introduced them one morning at her clinic. Lindsay Mae Hartley was in her early 30s, a special education teacher at Pinefield Elementary, a nearby school. She had warm, intelligent eyes and a wild curl of dark auburn hair, often tied back with a pencil when she worked. Tall and slim, with a tendency to talk with her hands, Lindsay had the calm patience of someone who'd spent her life speaking softly and being listened to anyway. She had come to Joanna's office to ask about therapy animals for her class. Many of her students were on the autism spectrum or struggled with trauma. Joanna, ever the matchmaker, had suggested she meet Lucas and the dogs. What started as a conversation about training soon turned into coffee at the Lakeside Cafe, long walks, and moments of surprising laughter. Lindsay had a quiet sadness in her past. To a younger brother lost to a car accident, a grief that made her especially gentle with those who were hurting. That understanding made her both cautious and deeply empathetic. Shadow has the temperament for it, Lindsay had said after their third meeting. He's calm under pressure, makes eye contact, and seems to respond to emotion. That's what we look for in a therapy dog. Do you think he might be ready? Lucas had hesitated, but when Shadow sat beside her, nudging her hand as she spoke, the answer was already clear. Now, twice a week, Lindsay visited to work with Shadow. They practiced responses to touch, tone, and scent, training him to notice when someone was overwhelmed or shutting down emotionally. She used Cody as a helper during the sessions, and the boy had never looked prouder than when handing over a treat after Shadow followed a command. Meanwhile, Whiskey, less subtle, more boisterous, became the unspoken king of backyard patrol. Lucas often joked that if Shadow was the heart, Whiskey was the spirit, but what none of them expected was what happened one evening when Lucas posted a short video online. Just a clip. Whiskey helping Cody practice basic commands in the snow, and Shadow gently laying his head in Lindsay's lap as she read aloud from a children's book. Lucas had captioned it, "Two dogs rescued from nowhere, now healing hearts, not just mine." The video went viral within 48 hours. It spread across social media platforms, shared with captions like, "Real heroes walk on four legs. These dogs saved a man's soul. Proof that second chances have four paws." Soon, messages began pouring in, some from former veterans struggling with PTSD, others from widows, single parents, or teenagers saying the story gave them hope. A small nonprofit called Companions of Courage, based in Oregon, reached out asking to share the video in their campaign to connect rescue dogs with isolated seniors. Joanna, always practical, set up a page for donations to a local pet rescue clinic. Within a week, it surpassed its goal. Then Lindsay proposed something bigger. "What if we start a program here?" she said one afternoon over tea. "Not just for therapy training, but matching rescued dogs with people who've been left behind. Elderly, grieving, lonely, like you once were." Lucas didn't reply at first. He just stared out the window, watching Shadow walk slowly beside Cody. The boy now wore a hand-stitched patch on his jacket. Team Shadow. He'd drawn it himself. And then Lucas nodded. "Let's do it." The morning sun of Frost Hollow filtered gently through the thinning mist, painting the woods in gold and silver hues. A full year had passed since Lucas Reed first stumbled upon the battered bodies of two dogs at the edge of this same forest road. Two lives he hadn't known would end up saving his own. Lucas stood now beside an old pine tree that leaned slightly to one side, its bark scarred by time and weather, its roots coiled out like patient fingers, holding the soil as if remembering every soul that had ever stopped here. The earth was still cool underfoot, soft with the changing of seasons. In Lucas's hand, he held a small wooden urn. He didn't speak. Words had long since become unnecessary in this place. Whiskey, now fully recovered, stood quietly at his side. His once hesitant gait had been replaced by a quiet strength, and the fur on his chest shimmered like honey under the sun. Shadow sat a few steps away, still and alert, his dark coat contrasting with the morning fog. When the wind shifted, Shadow raised his head and let out a low, mournful howl. Not loud, not showy, but ancient, as if calling out to something only they could sense. Lucas knelt. He opened the urn and poured the ashes into the base of the old pine. The wind, respectful, stayed still. It was the spot where he had first seen them, Shadow standing over a wounded friend. The same spot where he, unknowingly, had started healing. "I told her once," Lucas whispered, his voice dry, "that we'd build something that lasts. I just never thought it would take the three of us." Whiskey stepped forward, nose twitching at the scent of soil and memory, and lay down with his head on his front paws. He didn't move, just watched. 3 days later, the small-town community center opened its doors to the public for the first time since winter. It had been freshly painted in soft cedar green, with large windows overlooking the snow-lined riverbanks. A carved sign hung above the entrance, "Frost Hearts." The name had been Lindsay's idea. She now stood in the front lobby, arranging a vase of wildflowers on a table near the welcome desk. Dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, hair tucked behind her ear, she greeted each arriving guest with her usual warm calm. She had grown brighter over the past year, still carrying her grief quietly, but with room now for joy. Frost Hearts wasn't just a therapy center. It was a place for those who had once lost their footing, people who had buried loved ones, or fought battles no one else could see, or simply felt forgotten by a world too fast, too cold. And there, waiting for them each week, were dogs like Whiskey and Shadow, dogs who had survived. Inside, the walls were lined with framed photos. Lucas with Shadow during training, Cody hugging Whiskey under falling snow, elderly couples smiling with gentle retrievers in their laps, teenagers painting dog bowls with trembling hands. The air was filled with soft music, the scent of pine, and something harder to name, hope. Cody, now 11, wore a blue volunteer vest with a stitched badge that read, "Founding Member." His glasses slid down his nose as he guided an older woman named Marie through the tour. Marie, widowed and battling loneliness, had come upon the Frost Heart story online. Her hands trembled as she reached to pet Shadow, who responded with a quiet lean against her hip, her eyes misted. "I haven't been touched this gently," she said, "since my husband passed." Cody beamed. "That means he knows your heart." At noon, Lucas stood on the small wooden platform outside the center for the first official dedication. The crowd that had gathered wasn't large, but it was intimate, a community built not through advertisements, but by whispers, tears, and quiet triumphs. Lucas wore his usual flannel shirt and denim jacket. His voice, though deeper with age and memory, carried a strength that hadn't always been there. "Exactly 1 year ago," he began, "I found 2 dogs at death's door. I thought I was rescuing them, but the truth is, they rescued me." He paused. The crowd was silent. "We all have our own kind of pain. Some of it is sharp and sudden. Some of it lingers, whispering at the edge of every quiet night. But love, even the silent kind, the 4-legged kind, it's what pulls us back." He motioned to the 2 dogs beside him. Shadow sat with practiced patience. Whiskey wagged his tail, then flopped to the ground dramatically, earning a soft wave of laughter from the crowd. "They became my family, and this place," Lucas continued, "is for anyone searching for theirs." Behind the crowd, Lindsay watched with her arms folded across her chest. Her smile was proud, but laced with emotion. She remembered the broken man Joanna had introduced her to, and she remembered the moment he first looked her in the eye and said, "I don't want to be alone anymore." She walked up beside him once the applause faded, laced her fingers in his. They didn't need words. Not then. We don't choose where our story begins, but we can choose who walks beside us as we continue the journey. For 1 man lost in grief and 2 forgotten dogs left behind in the shadows of the forest, that choice changed everything. Whiskey didn't just find a new home. He reignited old memories, bridged hearts that had grown cold with silence, and became the gentle guardian of a dream long thought lost. Shadow, ever watchful, became the heartbeat of hope, proving that even the quietest protectors can heal what we thought was broken forever. And maybe that's what life is, stumbling into the unexpected, and realizing that love has teeth, paws, and the ability to wait at your door until you're ready again. In your everyday life, don't overlook the quiet ones, the loyal ones, the ones who stay. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little light today. Leave us a comment, subscribe for more tales of hope, and let the world know we still believe in second chances. May God bless you wherever you are, and may you always have someone, even with 4 legs, walking beside you.